So the question is, where do we stand today before we head into the fall market? Summer is now officially over and we are at the precipice of fall, which in Toronto real estate is traditionally one of the busiest times of the market. So we're going to take a look at how have 3 back-to-back interest rate reductions factor in, and how do we cut through all the noise and fear portrayed in the mass media and just look at the facts and data to extrapolate where we are today and what ramifications that could have over the next 3 to 4 months on the Toronto real estate market. Welcome to the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. My name is Ralph Fox. I am the co-founder and broker of record of Fox Marin. And today we have joining us the fabulous co-founder of Fox Marin, Kori Marin. How are you today, Kori?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. Coffee today, this morning, is my new best friend.
Oh my gosh, it's always your bestie.
Reunited best friend.
Yes. Well, I'm really happy that we're going to have the opportunity to have this discussion today.
Yeah.
When we're monitoring the market, and share with our viewership today so that buyers and sellers alike are super informed as to where we stand today after an entire year of data that we're basically processing, ingesting, and sharing today. So we're going to talk about these key markers, give you an indication, as you said in your introduction, where we stand today. What realistically does today's market look like, and how that may or may not influence the fall market. So let's dive in. We've got some slides for you. We're going to review and take a deeper dive into. So let's just start talking about sales volume overall. And I want our viewers to understand exactly what we're looking at here. So we are only looking at Toronto-specific data. So that's what's been extrapolated here. And in this particular slide, we're looking at transactions moving through the system. So actual deals that have taken place through the MLS system and have been recorded. And in all these slides, we're looking at the last 12 months. So we're looking at August 2023 all the way up to August of 2024, which was just last month. And we're looking at that 12-month span. And we're also showcasing in the black tabs just specific markers so you can understand where things stand on the graph as well, just to give you an indication of those highs and lows, peaks and valleys. So this first one here shows the amount of sales for freeholds and condos combined. So these are all the asset classes here. And we're showing that we have had less transactions moving through the system than we did August of last year. In fact, we're down about 9%. So less things are selling, less people are buying. And what's interesting in this graph to me is that we actually peaked in terms of sales volume in the spring of this year, which I'm wondering and questioning, does that sort of indicate a regular cycle for us in Toronto where for a long period of time, we really didn't see seasonality? So it would just be like busy every single week, every single month, every single season of the Toronto market was hot, hot, hot for like the last decade. And before that, you would often see sales cycles where things would peak in the spring and things would peak in the fall. And so when we look at this, we do see that spring peak here when we're looking at 2024. And I'm wondering, does that showcase or indicate perhaps forecast that we might see a little bit of a peak in volume, not necessarily prices, but volume moving into the fall market here in Toronto? Ralph, do you want to add anything to my commentary there?
No, it is interesting to see the peak of the last year being in May as we headed into June. And that was, I think, potentially also in anticipation of the first rate reductions, which was really symbolic and marking the end of the interest rate hiking. The higher for longer narrative was about to end right at that point. And I think there was a lot of anticipation from people involved or active in the market that there would be a surge of buyers coming to market and you better get in now. And actually the exact opposite happened. We saw a lot of sellers coming to market and we saw a lot of the buyers that were on the sidelines remain on the sidelines. And so it looks like that was around the time that we had this run up. So part of it might be seasonality, but part of it also might have been in anticipation of a surge of buyers that actually never came to market. And actually, in hindsight, we saw a surge of sellers that surprised a lot of people.
Yeah, that's so true. And I always think it's funny, Ralph, when I ask you, Ralph, Do you have anything you want to add to this? You always say no, but.
But
And then you
there's
talk for 10
nothing I
minutes.
want to add to this, but there is something I'd like to say.
Every
I
time.
think that is what I was articulating.
All right. So sales volume overall. So let's move along and let's look at active listings. So active listings is inventory available on the market at the end of every month. So this is basically an indication of how much stuff is out there for buyers to consider, look at, and potentially offer on. So we're also seeing some peaks and valleys here, and very obvious that we have more inventory on the market than we did last year at this time. So more sellers are trying to sell. Again, this is Toronto and this is everything combined, condos and freeholds. And we're totally acknowledging that a large portion of this is condos. So we're actually up 37% versus last year, which means buyers have 37% more options to consider if they actually do want to get into the market right now. So that's a significant amount more than we have seen in the past. And this is showcasing why things are taking longer to sell because people have more selection. They can take their time. They don't have FOMO. Things are not selling in 3 hours or 1 day or even 1 week like we've been acclimatized in the market, and people can take their time. And if they're like, if I don't get this one, there might be something else for me next week. Or if I don't get this one, I can select the other house that's been listed down the street 2 days later, for example. So I think that this is really interesting to see. And I also think it's interesting to see that, this is probably seasonality related. The lowest amount of product available to purchase was in December. And so we all know here in Toronto that December and January is a low activity time because people are busy due to the holidays. And also houses and condos just really do not show their best in winter here in Toronto, where it's wet, it's gray, it's dark, and there's absolutely no greenery anywhere. So generally speaking, less sellers are interested in putting their home or condo on the market that time of year. So that's not really surprising to see the valley as indicated in this chart. The other thing that we did was let's just take a little preview into what's happening this September so far. So I went into our system, which is called Realm, and I pulled how many new listings contracted or started effective September 1st and onwards have been listed in September so far. So this is showcasing how much new inventory is coming online or fresh meat per se. Again, I want to really acknowledge that a lot of this is going to be repeat inventory. So people who did not or were not able to sell their condo or house during the summer have probably or likely terminated their listing and they're relisting in September to look fresh on the market. And this is something that we would do if we were working with sellers that had homes or condos that did not sell. So far in the first 10 days of September, we've seen 878 freehold houses come to market. And we've already seen 1,425 new condo listings coming to market in the first 10 days of September. So this is not necessarily giving you the warm and fuzzy feelings about the condo market. In fact, I'm like, ooh, there looks like there might be even more supply coming online and less of it being chewed through. But again, it's really hard to predict.
What I think is really interesting is seeing a drop in inventory on the market from June to end of August. So I think that's something to keep our eye on. We definitely are well ahead of where we were in 2023, end of August. So we are up 37%, but it is interesting to note that we are 1,000 less properties on the market from what looks like the peak in June to the end of August. So it'll be really interesting because the data that you presented about September right up until today, Kori, it's really hard to know, is that really part of the 8,600 or is that adding to it? So time will definitely tell, but it is interesting to see that we are heading to lower inventory than what we'd previously seen throughout the late spring and early summer.
Well, when we look at the inventory graphs themselves, we're definitely going to see an up on both categories, freeholds and condos. So we will talk about that more.
And that will sort of complete the story.
Exactly. The storytellers that we are. Okay, let's move along. Let's look at price because, again, as I always say, people really only care about this. All right. So, not to repeat myself, but we're looking at Toronto, freeholds, and condos combined. And so, again, you're seeing peaks and valleys throughout the whole year. But what's interesting with everything going on, interest rates included, a very volatile political climate, a lot of people struggling with the economy. And so, considering all of that, and a lot of negative buyer sentiment, it is really interesting to see that overall we are still up in price 2.26% versus last year at this time, which I personally find that rather surprising. And so there is resilience here in our market. Now, we're also saying not everything is selling. Yes, we're saying there's quite a bit of inventory out there. And yes, there's quite a bit of active listings out there. But what is selling? So what's actually gone through the system is up 2.26% versus last year at this time. So I feel like we're just in a little bit of a stalemate in terms of sellers being stubborn on their prices and then buyers not being hyper aggressive. And the deals are actually going through the system, which are not as many as there were, are still, they're finding that middle ground, that medium balance in terms of valuation. And things are taking longer to sell for sure, but you're kind of finding a middle ground and that's showing a decently healthy price. Ralph, do you want to add to that?
No.
Okay.
And this time I mean it.
I know. I was going to test you there. So I do want to showcase, and we're going to talk about condos a little bit more in more detail, but I did pull the average sold price for the first week of September for freeholds and condos. So the average freehold really the first 10 days of September is selling for about 1.5 million, and sellers are getting 102% of the asking price, which indicates that as we all know, this asset class is outperforming condos. And the average condo in the first 10 days of September is selling for $692,000, 99% of the asking price, and just slightly higher, and we're going to talk about condos in more detail, than the August sale price. And so when we get to that particular slide, we're going to drill down on condos a little bit more because I know that's where everyone feels the most nervous. That's where we're at price. Ralph, do you want to make any predictions on prices moving into the fall?
No, I think it's really difficult to predict anything short term at all these days, let alone Toronto real estate. I'll say it again. I don't think that there's any short-term pending crash coming. I know that will disappoint some of the people watching who seem to be hoping for this crash that never comes. I don't think it's forthcoming this fall. I probably expect to see more of the same with a slight uptick in activity as interest rates continue to come down. I think the market will be led by freehold houses just due to lack of supply and increased affordability as rates continue to see downward pressure. Condos probably will remain sluggish for the rest of this year.
I totally agree.
We'll chug along probably as is. And it'll just chop up and down slight increments.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of us at Fox Marin, where are we having the most activity in terms of our own clients? We're working more with sellers or buyers. Tell our viewers a little bit about that.
Across the board, anecdotally, over, I'd say the last 2 to 3 weeks, most of the activity definitely has been on the sale side. We have a number of listings coming to market. Interestingly enough, in most instances where somebody has a 1-bedroom or 1+ den to sell, we're basically advising them not to go to market. And these are the listings that we traditionally would take on, but are really advising not to take on. And that is that category is something that we don't have anything coming to market. But I think the majority of the properties that we have will be highly sellable. And there is a market in Toronto there are segments of the market that are still quite active. So I'd say most of the activity we're seeing is on the sale side. Mm-hmm. We did have a number of clients successfully purchase properties in August, but we're not seeing a lot or a big rush of activity on the buy side. So it's still very early days into September. And obviously we're just speaking anecdotally from our own experience. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, there are blips with distraction of summer and the elections going on in the US and everything else. So we'll see how things play out, but it's definitely slower on the buy side right now than what we have seen over the last few months in terms of new conversations and new clients coming into the Fox Marin fold. We'll see how things play out over the next few months.
Yep, it's going to be very interesting times.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's move on to inventory, which is such an important marker. And if you're really looking to educate yourself about the Toronto real estate market, this is a data point I really want you to get accustomed to looking at as a buyer or seller, because this is going to really help you make thoughtful and intelligent decisions about what you're going to do on the selling side or the buying side. So again, this is Toronto specific. We're not talking about 905. We're looking at the last 12 months. And here we've grouped everything together, condos and freeholds. And we're looking about at the amount of inventory or the months of inventory available. And so, Ralph, why don't you walk the viewers through what these different market types are, just so that we can better educate people on what these numbers mean. And then we'll talk about exactly where we're at versus last year.
The idea of months of inventory is basically if you took all the existing inventory currently on the market for sale, if nothing were to come out tomorrow at the current rate of sales, how long would it take everything that's on the market to sell? So traditionally, anything under 4 months is considered to be an active seller's market. 4 to 6 is balanced, and a buyer's market is 6 months or longer. So you can see where we started in August 2023 with 2.4 months of inventory, very much a seller's market. And you can see that steady incline, as you were alluding to earlier, Kori, where now we're up to 3.7 months. So still technically in a seller's market, but very much on the cusp of overall entering into balanced market territory. So it's important to note, and it's also important to understand that a huge percentage of that is driven from the excess condo inventory that's been sitting on the market, and that's really been skewing the numbers. But still, all things being equal, according to the definition of months of inventory and where a seller's and buyer's market start and end in lieu of a balanced market, we're still very much in the seller's market, although we are starting to head overall towards a balanced market if this increased trend line continues.
Yes. And I think it's really important to know that when the market was super steamy and spicy and hot, the months of inventory that we had online was about 2 to 3 weeks of supply.
Yes.
So like to us, this looks like a mega amount because we're just used to the velocity of the Toronto real estate market over the last decade where we've had such little supply and we've been like, oh my God, you have like 1 hour to make a decision to buy this house, because if you don't, then there'll be nothing for you to buy because we had such little inventory. It was just getting chomped through hour after hour, day over day. So we're definitely looking, and like I said earlier, there's just more product out there, especially on the condo side, for buyers to consider if they even want to jump into the market right now. And that's the other part of this is like buyers aren't exactly like running over to like and scrambling to get their hands on anything. I think there's so many people waiting on the sidelines, and that's totally fair. Not judging that, but where somebody tells me I am. I get so scared of the trolls sometimes. Okay. So let's look at condos more specifically, because this is the juggernaut. This is what the media is spending their time on. This is what everyone's freaking out about. I even worry about our own condos too sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night. So let's just drill down on this a little bit more, as indicated that we just want to talk about the reality of what the data is saying today. Okay, so where are we at today with condos? So you can again see these peaks and valleys. So last year at this time, the average condo in Toronto was 725,000. The average condo in Toronto in August of this year was 681,000. So we're seeing a drop off of about 6.2% in terms of valuation, which I actually don't think is like that crazy, considering how much inventory, and we're going to look at that on the next slide, and how much negativity there is about the condo market and the interest rates that we just went through, and the investors really pulling out of this market segment. So similar to what we saw on the average price for overall asset classes, we saw that peak on price in the spring, with the average condo actually being up versus August of 2023. 23. And we're looking at the average price of 767,000 in like May, June of 2024 when we saw that little bit of a run up in the spring. So I wouldn't freak out too much if you're looking at this, if you are a condo owner. And I want to just talk about what we're seeing that first 10 days of September. The average condo price is actually 692,000 in these first 10 days. And so that's actually up versus what we saw as the average in August. Not a lot. I'm not saying I'm predicting anything. I'm just saying it's just slightly up versus the August average. As I mentioned earlier, condos are getting 99% of the asking price. There's been 128 sales, and they're taking 41 days to sell on average, which is a long time for Toronto. Like to us, that feels like a year compared to what we're used to. And so for those of you who are not really sure what days on market means, it just means exactly how it sounds. How long does it take this condo to sell? And that is inclusive of the conditional period. So if a buyer has put conditions of status certificate review or financing or an inspection or whatever else they might have added to their offer, that's inclusive of that due diligence period as well. So 41 days is a pretty long period of time compared to what we're used to here when things were selling in a day, 2 days, 10 days. Ralph.
Nothing to add for reals.
Oh, wow. Okay. So this is the last slide I just wanted to go over because this is the one where you're like, ooh, I'm feeling the feels when I look at this slide. And when you pull it and you see that visual, it doesn't give you the warm and fuzzies necessarily about the condo market because you're seeing all that supply just keep adding up, adding up, adding up. And as we indicated on the first or second slide, we saw even more inventory coming online in September. Again, we're not sure if that's cumulative or not, or just recycled condos re-entering the market. But still, and as Ralph explained, months of inventory on the condo side specifically, we're looking at 4.8 months of supply on the condo side, which is up 52% versus last year at this time. So we're not seeing a major price correction yet. We've only seen that drop off of 6% in terms of valuation. I just feel like we're just in, like, and we've said this in former podcasts, we're just in this stalemate. We're just, buyers aren't coming to buy it and sellers aren't really budging and everyone's just sort of holding. And if they're not getting the price that they want, they're either keeping it vacant or they're renting it out. So we're just sort of seeing this like nothingness happen except for condos collecting some dust out there. So if you are a condo seller, you really need to look at your strategy, look at your pricing, look at your marketing strategy, staging, painting, repair work, storytelling. All of this is going to make a significant difference to stand out from the masses. Ralph.
And if you if you own a property, if you own a condo and you don't have to sell, don't. It just doesn't make sense to be putting your property, just slapping it on the market and trying to sell in this environment unless you absolutely have to sell financially or you have a better use of the capital knowing that you're selling in a challenging time. So it'll be really interesting to sort of see how this plays out, knowing that despite everything, we still are very much in a balanced market, even on the condo side from an inventory perspective. Could we head into a buyer's market? Potentially. That's where you'll start to see greater pressure on pricing. But because of where we're sitting at, believe it or not, that's why we're seeing prices still relatively hold. And you're seeing a lot of sellers who, if they can't get their price that they want, they're not necessarily, at least this point in time, selling under duress. And if they're having to refinance or they're on a variable, they know that time is on their side because rates are going to continue to come down. So very interesting to see how this will all play out.
And I think for the buyers out there that are on the sidelines, I mean, we've said this before, it's a great time to at least go see what's out there because you might be able to negotiate something really awesome for yourself and really add in that buffer of conditions and second walkthroughs or bringing your parents through or bringing, a trusted friend through. You've got time on your side to consider what you really want, look at floor plans, look for something special, and then negotiate and then add those conditions to your offer. So it is a nice time to be a buyer. I'm not saying that you have to buy. I'm not forcing this down your throat. I'm not saying that there might not be better opportunities in the future. But as a buyer right now, you can look in a very responsible, strategic way, which has not been something buyers have had the power to do for many, many, many years here. So,
and this is not a traditional Toronto real estate market, but it's not a traditional environment where you see interest rates go from zero basically to 500 basis points in 18 months. And we're starting to see that pressure alleviate. And over time, this situation that we're currently in, whether it'll get slightly better or slightly worse over the next 3 or 4 months, it's really difficult to tell. But over the long term, this won't be like this forever. And I think that's a really important thing to understand, knowing the pressures of upcoming supply that we're going to have in the market with immigration and demand, especially when and if low rise takes off, which
yes.
it will.
Well, I think it'd be really interesting next week, Ralph, for the podcast, if we do a deeper dive into the first 2 weeks of September's data and like drill down, because I know somebody's going to ask, how are detached semis towns performing in comparison to condos, and looking at all those market segments individually in terms of inventory and price and new listings coming online. And that will be a nice, healthy data set to take a look at those first 2 weeks. So let's do that next week, and we can revisit some of this, and that might or may not help us forecast how things are going to play out between now and the holidays.
Awesome. I think that's a great idea. As always, Cor, I look forward to having that discussion and seeing what the picture is coming out of the first 2 weeks of September.
Sounds great. Well,
Awesome.
Thank you everybody so much for joining us today. If you like the content or you don't like the content, whatever it is, please feel free to comment with your constructive points of view. And as we've mentioned before, we really appreciate and respect that not everybody has to agree with us. So feel free to say what you want to say in a respectful way in the comments. We'll make sure that we reply if we can. And if you'd like to, it would be great if you could subscribe and like this video. That really, really helps us out too. So thank you so much for joining us today. We just really appreciate your attention to all these data points and charts and conversations. And it's just great to have you here. So thank you so much.
And as Corey would always say, contact us. We're nice. We're always here and love to talk about the market and real estate and help people navigate a very challenging time in Toronto real estate. But this will not last forever. And so it's really important to be thoughtful about your real estate and your investment future decisions.
For sure. Thanks,
Awesome.
Ralph, so much.
Okay,
bye, everybody.
Thanks, Cora. Thanks for watching. Bye.